So Nader Dabit, welcome to the show. Um, we're just talking about your non-traditional background and growing up in Mississippi and how you've gotten to where you are today. How about you take us back, sort of back to your 20s? Um, how did you start out, and how do you eventually end up learning? Getting into coding.
Okay, yeah. So I guess going back, I kind of mentioned in some of the discussions I had online in the past how I didn't finish school. I didn't finish high school. I didn't even get a degree. I basically dropped out. In the United States, the if you drop out, you still can go to college if you get something called a GED. So I had a lot of problems in high school with just I don't know. I just wasn't a good student, but also I had drug and alcohol abuse issues even in high school, and I also was kind of like an outcast a little bit in Mississippi because here, depending on like where you go to school, it's still kind of racist here. And I'm half Arabic, and I have like a really weird name to the people here. So depending on like who I was around, some people like never even like saw that in me at all, and they were just like, oh, this is a regular guy. A lot of people even assumed just I'm some regular white guy. But of course, there are also those people that are kind of ignorant, and I think I got a lot of hard time for those people growing up, and it kind of just was one of the many reasons I felt like maybe I didn't fit in or do good in school, and kind of got into that drugs and alcohol. And I dropped out when I was 17 and got my GED a couple of like maybe a year or two later and decided I wanted to go to college. Tried that, didn't work out either. It wasn't because of any reasons other than just me being like lazy or just not having any ambition or anything like that. So after that, I was kind of living, at home with my parents, and I would do either like odd job type of work, or I would go work for my dad who had like a clothing store, and I would work as like a salesman. So I would like have that to fall back on, and wasn't paid a lot, but I could always literally just like go and work there. So I had a little bit of like, privilege there. Or a lot of privilege, however you would look at it, for someone just to be able to like not be homeless and have some income if I needed it. But I also tried a bunch of other things. So, I worked as a host in a restaurant, basically seating people to their tables. I worked as a clothing salesman in other people's stores. I worked as a furniture salesman. I worked in restaurants as kind of like other things. Like I did dishwashing at one point, also did bartending at one point. I did restaurant management at a later point. I did all kinds of stuff, really. I tried real estate as far as like being a real estate salesperson. Sold real estate for like a year. That didn't really work out. I even had I tried to open like a tailoring business where you basically bring in clothes and people like, get fitted for suits, and you kind of like take their measurements and send off the measurements to get suits. Or maybe if someone brings like a dress and you want to tailor it to like fit them. So that didn't work out either. I tried a bunch of stuff basically. And, I just never really found a good fit, but, I did always have that fallback to the clothing business. So basically the way I got into programming had to do with the clothing business, because I was working for my dad at the time, and we were hoping to take the suits that we have and sell them online. So we hired a web developer a couple of times locally, like in Mississippi, and we had no idea what we were doing. And, to us, like $5,000 is like a lot of money. So like when we would hire someone for a couple of $1,000, like we expected the world, because we just had no idea what to expect. And of course you can't really get a lot for that type of money. So we had bad luck. So we hired a few people that were charging in those types of ranges, a few $1,000, and didn't really have any luck. So I was like, okay, I'm going to build this website myself. So I had taken an HTML class in my 1 or 2 stints in community college, and that's kind of what I knew was HTML. So I was like, okay, like, I know a little bit. Like I don't really know anything actually. When I started digging into it, I realized I knew nothing. But I used WordPress to basically build an e-commerce site. And with WordPress, you don't really have to know a lot of coding to kind of get up and running. So we got it up and running, and then I started digging into the backend code a little bit, CSS, HTML, PHP, and I was able to make tweaks and stuff. And the actual website started doing really well. It started making a lot of sales, and like it was like the first thing that I'd actually done in my life that was like, successful. So I was automatically very, very like excited about it because like, I don't know, you dig and you do all these things in your life, and some people, have talent, or they're educated to the point where they can do like other things and maybe switch careers pretty easily, but some people don't, and everyone's different. But I think like the fact that like I was able to do that and it started becoming successful made me want to do coding full time, and that's really why I got into coding, because of that experience.
Damn, that's so cool. And what age was that?
I was 29. I was I was pretty old at the time. I mean, I don't know if you would say that's old, but I mean, compared to the people when I was like getting into programming, I felt old. Even though like 10 years later now, I don't feel old. But like when I first got into it and I had my first programming job, I was like well into my early 30s. And the people I was working with were like, fresh out of like college or high school.
Mm.
So I kind of felt old.
Yeah,
But I mean, there's people
yeah,
that learn in their 50s and 60s. So I mean, I'm not, saying anything. It's just more like in hindsight, it wasn't. But at the time, I felt like I was old.
yeah, of course. I mean, I just turned 26 and I sometimes feel, quite old myself. So
Yeah, it's kind of like that thing when you're young, you don't really realize like how much opportunity you still have in front of you, I think.
exactly. Okay. So, I take it you went online, taught yourself some basic, programming skills, HTML, CSS, the whole, shebang. You built that site for the family business. What next?
Yeah, so I mean, for sure, the whole like right when I started, getting into that whole building the website thing, I was deep diving into self learning, and I was like all over the internet. Like, and at this time, I think Harvard and Stanford and MIT, they started putting their courses online for free,
Mhm.
and I was like blown away that you could get this stuff for free, and I was just like gobbling that stuff up. I would stay up and work like 80 or 90-hour weeks during these times because I was really excited about this stuff, and I was just I could not get enough of that information. So I was like all over the internet. I bought Lynda and Pluralsight subscriptions. Like it was like $100 a month, maybe, for all that stuff put together. But the value that got for me was like invaluable. I would buy books. I would just everything I could do to learn. I was just eating it all up. And then from there, like, yeah, so like, how did I get my first job after that? So I was living in Mississippi, and I still live in Mississippi now. And I started like wondering, can I get a job doing this? So I started applying, and I never had an opportunity because there just wasn't anyone hiring here. And if they were, they wanted like a degree or like, 5-10 years experience. But, just like now, like it was even back then in 2012 or 13, it was, there was a big demand for developers in certain parts of the United States. So I decided, if I really want to do this, like I'm just gonna like take any job I can get anywhere in the United States, and I'm just gonna move there if I get a job. So I started applying for jobs in New York. I started applying for jobs in San Francisco and San Diego and LA, the four biggest kind of cities that I would be interested in living in or close to. And I finally got a job offer in Huntington Beach. I'm sorry, in Los Angeles, kind of California, and I moved to Huntington Beach. But the job offer in LA, I got it on like a Thursday. It was a consulting gig. It wasn't even like a full-time job. It was just like a contract. And they wanted me to start on Monday, but it was Thursday, and I was in Mississippi. So I basically told them I would take it, and I didn't tell them I didn't live in LA. Instead, I just bought a plane ticket the next day and like flew there and just lived there and moved there. And my wife and my one kid at the time spent the next like month and a half or 2 months packing up our house and putting it in storage. And we rented out just like a really tiny like apartment in LA, and we lived there because LA is like really expensive, and I wasn't making that much money. So it's like you do what you can, you take what you can get. But yeah, so I lived in LA. I was there for maybe a year and a half ish, and I got fired from my first job actually after being there for about 3 months because I really didn't know what to expect. So I pretty much loaded my resume with a bunch of words that I thought if I had a little bit of experience with, I can like say that on my resume. But when I got there, they actually expected me to know this stuff, and a lot of it I knew, but a lot of it I didn't know. So I got fired, and but I kind of also, it was the best experience of my life at that location, at that job, because two things. First of all, I was able to start to understand like what I needed to know versus what I didn't need to know, because I was working on real world projects and seeing other people work on those. Um, so I was able to kind of get a good grasp of like what this industry means and like looks like from the perspective of maybe an employer. So I knew kind of what to learn next. But also the developers that I worked with, I had never known of conferences or meetups or community or open source or any of that stuff. Like I just didn't really know much about it or if it was that big a deal. But the people that I worked with there were all about this stuff. So they would take me to meetups and they would take me to conferences, or they would talk about conferences. Actually, I don't believe I attended a conference with them, but they were involved in like that whole community of conferences and stuff. And from there, I was like just drawn into another area of this space. Okay, like, oh, I can learn all this stuff on my own, but I can also meet other people and they can teach me and I can teach them and I can network. So that was a big change in my career, like being introduced to the whole community. And from there in LA, I kind of had a few contract gigs here and there. And I was just really like for that entire year, just every spare second I had, I was learning. I was just like a learning machine. I would literally like wait for my kids and my wife to go to sleep, and I would stay up for like, hours at a time learning. And then, in the morning I would go early and go to the office early and be studying and stuff like that. So like during that year, I kind of really got the experience and the knowledge I needed to kind of feel like I was an actual developer.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And did you always, um, had you always sort of been on the lookout for the next gig, or did it sort of naturally, organically happen?
At the time, I was still blown away, like at the fact that I was just working as a developer, because like I was getting paid, even though I wasn't getting paid like that much compared to some people probably. To me, like I was getting paid like 50 to 70,000 bucks a year, like if I put my hourly wage or whatever contract I was in. And to me, that was like a lot of money, and it still kind of is a lot of money, right? I mean, depending on like what you're doing, like if you're a teacher or something, that's a shitload of money. So like I was just so happy to be getting paid that much money. I didn't really care at the time. I was just like taking, and I was just showing up for work and just like happy like I was getting paid. So I wasn't really thinking too far in the future. I just wanted to be able to like pay my bills and continue learning. And I knew like one day I would hopefully be able to kind of make a real career out of it. But at the time, I mean, that was a really great career, and I was just happy to be where I was. But I think like over time, things started happening that fell into place that allowed me to start becoming more successful.
Okay. So I really just want to break it down and deconstruct it because, digging into your background, you're like a developer's developer, you're like, yeah, you work at Amazon and before you were making 400K as a consultant. And it's just like very, to novice, certainly it's very like overwhelming. Like, wow, how did he get there? So basically you started out, coding at 29, then got your first job, in LA, making anywhere like 50, 60, 70K. Okay. You did that for a year and a half. And, what next, cause
Yeah, totally. Cause like from there,
yeah,
like,
from there to like, yeah.
yeah, from there, I was transitioned like over the course of a few years, working at a few startups into my own consultancy, where I made over 400,000. This was just in 2016, 2017. So between 2012 for my first job into 2016, 17, I was able to kind of move my income from like 50K was my first contract. If I had worked the whole year, which I didn't, I got fired again. But say I'd worked over 50K, and then before I joined Amazon, I was making over 400,000 consulting. So like that was a 4 or 5 year period. So what happened during that period? Well, I moved back to Mississippi with a remote contract that I had in LA. The cost of living was really high in LA. I also felt comfortable enough that I could find a job in Mississippi, or I could continue finding contract remote work. So we moved back. Cost of living helped out a lot. We were able to kind of, increase our quality of life by living here in Mississippi. And I got a couple of jobs. So like after I got back, I got a job at a local like agency for 1 year. And then I moved into a kind of like a corporate level type of work position at a telecommunications company here for 1 year. And both of those both of those experiences kind of taught me a lot about, working with teams, and I learned new tech. It was a great experience, but they weren't probably where I would want to work forever. So after working at the telecommunications company for a year, I got an opportunity to work at a startup here in Mississippi, which was a really, really great opportunity that opened a lot of doors for me, because at the telecom company, we were writing like jQuery and WordPress and stuff. And then at this startup, we were writing React and using Webpack and using Babel and React Native and all this more new tech. So the opportunity to work there, I didn't really get more money to work there, but I did get, I think, a better like working environment. It was more like the startup culture where you didn't have to worry about dressing up for work, where you could kind of like, you had a little more flexibility in your time off and that type of stuff. So I worked there for 2 years, and during those 2 years, that was probably, other than my first job, probably the most growth I had in my career during any other time, because during those 2 years, I was learning React and in particular React Native. And React Native came out right as I started there, and we needed a mobile project. And I was really interested in the mobile space and using JavaScript, because I was kind of like, that was my language, and it still is. So I was using jQuery mobile a long time ago, and then I started using Ionic and then Cordova and all that stuff. And then React Native came out, and I was like, oh, I can write JavaScript and still write mobile apps, and this stuff is way more performant, and it actually is not just HTML and the DOM. I mean, in a DOM and in a wrapper in a native app, it's actually kind of like a native app. So it was really interesting to us. So we did a prototype, and they loved it, and therefore they gave me in that company the opportunity to kind of build their first mobile app. So I used React Native to build that app, and during that time, I learned a lot about React Native, and I started going on to Stack Overflow and just answering everyone's questions on React Native. And just doing that, I became kind of an expert in React Native, like compared to maybe the average person coming in. I'm not saying I'm like the expert, but I did learn enough to where I was kind of able to start answering questions without really having to think on Stack Overflow. But also I had the opportunity, like on Stack Overflow, it was still kind of new, so there weren't a lot of people answering, it's great, because usually when an answer comes on now, it's answered in like a couple of seconds. But taking the questions that people asked that I didn't know the answer to, I would actually just spin up a new React Native project and debug that myself and find the answer, and then go and answer it. So I was able to kind of like learn during doing that process over and over and over. And I started getting a lot of numbers, whatever the credibility you get on Stack Overflow. And apparently people use Stack Overflow as a recruiting tool. So I started getting a lot of offers for opportunities coming in just from doing that. I also started a React Native podcast called React Native Radio at the time, because I was really interested in React Native. And I was like, there isn't a React Native podcast. So I started those two things. And I think those two things together got me a lot of opportunities in the React Native space. So the big things that happened then was I started getting approached by publishers. I know a lot of people are probably writing books and stuff these days. And it was still popular just a couple of years ago. But I think that like for me, I was just never thought I would be having opportunity to write a book. So I was like, when I thought about it, I was like, hell yeah, I'll do this. This is crazy. Like, I would love to do this. And so I had the opportunity to write the book. And then I was in talks to write a book for this one publisher, and then Manning Publications came around, and they also wanted me to write a book. And I thought Manning was maybe the better publisher to go with. So I went with them, and I wrote React Native in Action. And I think during the time where I was writing that, it was already kind of out there that I was writing it. So I started getting a lot of opportunities for consulting for React Native, because I'd written the book, I had the podcast, and I was answering the questions on Stack Overflow. So when someone would Google my name, like that would come up, and they would see that I knew my stuff there. So I was making decent money, still in Mississippi, working as a software engineer at a startup. But the money that I started seeing from consulting, like I was able to, like actually my job, I negotiated to be able to work 4 days a week and then be able to do consulting 1 to 2 days a week, or any time in my free time actually. But I had 1 day off where I could go do consulting. And the money I was making doing like 1 or 2 days of consulting was more than I was making 4 days a week in my full-time job, first of all, over the course of like maybe the second year I was working there. So I was like, okay, you can make a lot of money contracting, but it's not really steady because like if I lost a contract, I wouldn't get paid. Um, but I was like, if I could get full-time contract work, I would be making a ton of money. So like I was interested in that, but I wasn't really pursuing it. It was just more of one of those things like that would be cool. But I started getting approached for trainings during the last few months of my work at that company, and apparently the training business is like this big thing that it might not be that big of a thing now with coronavirus because people aren't doing on-site training, but on-site training is like a really high value thing that all these companies do, and they hire people all the time for this stuff, and they're paying a lot of money for it. So they're paying anywhere between like, it's very common to hear in the range of $5,000 to $20,000 per day for training. And I started listening to podcasts of people that were doing training and hiring other people that were trainers to kind of get their perspective on how to deal with these people that were approaching me. So I hired Reuven Lerner to help me like coach me through dealing with these clients. So I accepted a couple of training offers, and one training would be like 10 or 20,000 bucks for just 2 days of work. So I would take time off, like paid time off, not paid time off. I would take like, yeah, I would basically take whatever time off I was given by my regular job to go do these things instead of taking a vacation. I was like, going to make extra money. And then I had a really big contract that came up for training. It was a $120,000 contract. And that was almost twice as much as I was making in my full-time job, but it was only going to be for 15 days of work. So at that point, I realized this is going to be more profitable for me. So I quit my job and I took that training. And then from there, I was doing consulting full-time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned that story on Faraz's podcast, which I'll link below. It's super great. So many nuggets in that. So basically, tons of content marketing, the podcast, Stack Overflow, and then you essentially, position yourself as an authority on React Native, and the opportunities came to you.
Yeah, I think that in consulting, that's kind of the place that you want to be. You don't want to be approaching clients. You want the clients to approach you. And there's a bunch of ways that you can kind of like position yourself in that way. But overwhelmingly, it's about content marketing of some type. You could be blogging, you could be networking, you could be speaking at events, you could be writing books, you could be creating courses. There's all types of people doing all sorts of interesting stuff, and everything works differently for each person. I think it's just kind of what is your niche, like what do you feel comfortable doing, and how can you do that effectively is kind of like the question that you would probably ask yourself. But yeah, it's all kind of about content marketing. For me, it was like during this time, I also was creating blog posts and stuff. When I would learn something, I would just blog about it. And all of this stuff kind of starts interconnecting. Like your name is just connected to all these little things, but it all just starts coming together over the course of like some time. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but I have seen people successfully do this stuff. Now that I'm in AWS, I'm especially just seeing this part of AWS. These consultants that are out there just crushing it, making a lot of money. I should just say that. But they're doing similar things that I was doing, but they're doing it like for, whatever their specialty is for cloud computing.
Yeah, I saw that one post the one tweet you sent out a couple of days ago about like the various AWS specialties making like shit tons of money. Like really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very common to hear in the $300 to $500 an hour range. That's very common, but there's actually people doing like $1,000 an hour consulting. But those, you have to be really like very, very in demand, I guess, of course, for that type. But I used to work for like you mentioned before, minimum wage is like $7, $8 an hour.
Yeah.
When I hear stuff like this, it still just kind of like blows my mind, and it's hard to even understand the value that people get out of this stuff. But I think when you're talking about scale, like the things that we build digitally, like the scale that they can actually affect, business and people, it's just hard for us, or at least for me as a person, to understand how that works sometimes, even now after being in this industry for so long.
Totally. Before I have like 3 or 4 questions in my head right now. So first of all, would you say right now, what you've been seeing lately, is there more demand for front end or for back end? Seeing as in my experience, back end is becoming more and more easy, quote unquote,
Hmm.
because of, AWS Amplify and all of those beautiful services. And front end seems to increasingly get more and more sophisticated, but maybe that's just my point of view.
I think that it depends. Like it depends on what your specialty is on the back end. I think that
Mm,
front end is definitely becoming more complex and more in demand, and there's a lot more to know, and people are getting paid more and more from what I've seen on the front end. And I think depending on your back end specialty, that is also happening, but not for the developer that's just creating like a REST API and Ruby on Rails or something like that. I think I think those types of repetitive tasks are being, like you mentioned, automated away by a lot of the tooling that's out there. So, like if you're specializing in just creating like basic REST APIs and stuff like that, like you're probably going to be having a slightly harder time than someone who is like specializing in like high frequency stock trading on DynamoDB, for example. That person can you know demand a lot of money because they have a very niche like specialty. So I think
right.
if like you're a backend developer, you consider yourself like what niche that you'd like to target, because if you just are a generalist, it might be kind of hard, yeah, to kind of to make a lot of money. But I do see the demand in front end continuing to go up, even in AWS. I mean, we're hiring in Amazon front end developers on every team, and it's hard to fill those roles.
Yeah. And like, what will you say the time span as far as like, going from like a more like a generalist sort of full stack developer to specializing and niching down and becoming known as, like, for instance, in your case, how long was it, give us maybe an estimate from like putting out content to like you becoming the go-to React Native guy? Was that like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think it was like about, I mean, if I could just say generally, it was probably about a
Mhm.
1 year span of work. And
Mhm.
that's when I started seeing the benefits of that. But it wasn't something that, it was like, again, like I knew what I was doing in the sense that I knew that I was trying to kind of make a name for myself, but I didn't know what I was doing in the sense that I thought I was going to make a lot of money off of it. I thought I was more like, okay, I want to like break into the community and become well known and like, maybe speak at events. But I didn't realize that when you're doing that sort of stuff, you're also getting a lot of like opportunity for like consulting and stuff, which other people I was copying were doing, knowing that, I think a lot of them. So it just kind of
Mhm.
like me being so like naive and not understanding the industry at the time was kind of like the reason, I guess, that I didn't realize that. But now, like in hindsight, yeah, if I wanted to execute on this again in a different space, I would have a better idea, and I would probably be a little more like I would have a little more of a game plan, I guess you could say.
And like, which brings me to my next question. I don't want to make it seem as if this was like a walk in the park, because clearly it wasn't. Can you maybe talk about your routine and your work ethic? Because it seems like you really have been putting in, like, I don't even know, 60, maybe 80-hour work weeks for years to get there.
Yeah, I mean, my work week just depends on what's going on in my life. Some
Mm,
lately I don't work as much as I used to, but when I have something that I need to get done, I will definitely put in up to 60 hours. I haven't really
mm,
gone over that much that lately in a long time, but during some of the times when I was ramping up, I would
mm,
say, like when I was writing my first book, I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, a lot of weeks trying to get that going. When I was creating like an open source project that I wanted to
mm,
launch, I would put in extra hours, stuff like that. If I had a blog post or something that I would write, that I'd want to write, I would probably do a lot of times do that off hours, like away from my main job. So that was over time. I think that the idea of having to like put in a lot of extra work for some of this stuff, in my case, it kind of was the case, but I don't really like. I'm not encouraging other people to do that, but I think that everyone has their own circumstances, and you could kind of
mm,
say like, what opportunities do I have with what I have, and what can I make of those
mm,
opportunities? And you can
mm,
kind of decide for yourself like how much, I guess, work would be involved there. But I do have a quite a solid routine. I put everything on my calendar.
mm,
Everything that I get done in the day is on my calendar. So if I want
mm,
to take like a 15-minute break, it's there. If I want to get coffee or eat lunch or talk to someone, or exercise. Everything has to be on there, because if it's not, I will not do it. And that seems to help me be very efficient, because before that, I mean, I think I found that I had 3 or 4 hours almost per day where I just was not doing anything. I was maybe messing around on Twitter, and I still do spend time on social media. I haven't gotten that away, but I've more have that on my calendar. I'm going to spend, 10 or 15 minutes checking my messages, and I'm going to then spend an hour making a video, and then I'm going to spend an hour writing. And, it just helps you not waste time. And as you get older and you have a family, you want to make sure that you are spending your time as efficiently as possible. Or maybe even when you're younger, you want to be efficient as possible, right? But I think as you get older, you value your time a little more, at least for me.
Totally. So is it like, have you ever been this insanely disciplined, or is this just basically because of your family forcing you to be more disciplined? Because me, as I don't have kids yet. I definitely get this a lot where I do, just mess around and it's like 2 hours gone. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, it kind of happened, I think, when I started maybe 3 years ago, when I started seeing some real success outside of just my day-to-day job, but maybe in the coding community. I think that was very, very encouraging for me, and I became really re-energized in my career and stuff. And at that point, I was like, okay, I have this massive opportunity. There's all these things that I can do. I don't want to waste this opportunity, so I'm going to try to use my time as efficiently as possible and see what I can do with this opportunity. Because that was around the time when I was like getting the opportunity to write a book, and I think that was kind of a big change in my career, that whole book process. And I think that writing a book does a lot of stuff. It kind of gives you the money you get isn't really that important. I think it's more about, if you're writing for a publisher, you gain a lot of opportunities from people having perceived your expertise in whatever subject that you write about. So you have people, again, approaching you for opportunities like speaking at events and, doing work and stuff like that. But I think that my really renewed effort as far as like trying to be efficient and working extra hard kind of was happening around the time that I got that book opportunity.
Totally. And also on a sort of, you mentioned Twitter. How do you, on a very practical note, how do you get to almost 40K followers on Twitter?
I mean, it's just, I've been on there for so long, and I think that I've linked to my Twitter from all of my blog posts and my GitHub. Over time, it just kind of happens, I think, as long as you're out there talking about interesting stuff. And I also try to go out there and make jokes and share interesting stuff and share the things that other people are doing that I think are really cool, and engaging with people that are engaging. So I think that if you do want to kind of, gain some type of following on social media, you can be a little strategic about it. You can recognize that there are some people that are just not ever on there and they're never active. And you can also recognize that there are people out there that are engaging with you and asking you questions and commenting on your stuff. And those are the people that I usually engage with, because they're there to have a conversation with me. And then other people will see us having conversations and they'll jump in, and then I'll start following them. I mean, everyone has a different strategy, but for me, it's just been, linking to my social media from everywhere, being kind of consistent about being on there and talking about stuff, sharing interesting stuff, and then engaging with people that are engaging with me, or just if I see an interesting person, I'll engage with them first as well.
And have you been kind of like scheduling, I don't know, you said maybe 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, or like an hour a day, maybe in the beginning? Do you do something like that, or how do you go about
I have
it?
an hour every day that I use for social media, and the only social media that I really use is Twitter. I have Instagram, but I don't really go on there. And the reason I have an hour for social media, it seems a lot, but it's actually when you have this many followers, you actually get a ton of messages and comments and stuff. And I want to make sure I respond to everyone. And I'm a developer advocate, so a lot of the questions are about work-related stuff. So I'm there answering those questions. I also help manage the Amplify Twitter account. So I'll sometimes go on there and retweet people and stuff like that. So part of my job is being on Twitter, which is pretty cool.
Do you do any coding at all for the AWS job?
Oh yeah, I still do a lot of coding, and I would not be here if I did not get to code. I think if I wasn't able to code at least half of my job, I would have to leave and go somewhere else. So I do
Yeah.
reference architectures, I do demo
Mhm.
projects, I submit pull requests
Mhm.
to open source. I create my own open source, do all kinds of stuff. I don't really do any like massive in production apps for other companies like I used to do as a consultant though, which is, I don't know, it kind of sucks, but at the same time, it kind of is cool because I don't have those headaches.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. It seems like a great job because you get the, interacting with people, communicating. Like I'm definitely also more of an extrovert. So I totally get that part of the job. And then on the other hand, you get to, get your focused, coding. So sounds like a great job you have there, Nader.
Yeah, it's a great job for me, and
Yeah.
if anyone is interested in like speaking and being involved in community discussions and sharing code and projects that they like to create and stuff like that, developer advocacy is a great job if you're kind of okay with getting out of your introvert bubble. Because I was, and I am kind of, believe it or not, kind of an introvert. I think over time though, like you go out of your way to make yourself comfortable speaking and doing all this stuff. So by nature I'm an introvert, but now I'm kind of like not an introvert. So
Mm. Yeah, yeah, no, it makes sense. I want to be cognizant of your time, Nader. Is there anything, is there like an ask, the audience skews heavily toward like techies, and like young professionals. Is there anything, anywhere you want to point people at all? What are your last parting words, maybe?
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on. I think that one thing I want to plug is there's a like a really cool, like I guess you could call it initiative called Laptops for Developers, and it's run by someone named Hack Sultan. But you can
Mhm.
actually just Google Laptops for Developers with the number 4, and it's a way to contribute money or laptop computers to an organization that he takes the computers and he has people that are interested in learning how to code, and he distributes those to the people that are learning how to code, and he has a lot of other resources for those. And to me, it's one of the more interesting. I mean, of course, there's many places you could donate your time and money, but
Mm.
to me, this is more of interesting because to me, like if someone had done this for me, maybe, or if I'd learned about coding maybe at a little early age, I could have maybe got into it early, and it's opened a lot of doors for me. So therefore, I feel maybe that doing this for other people is fulfilling or something. But for me, I really like laptops for developers. So if you're looking for a place to maybe contribute some money or to be involved, then check that out.
Absolutely. We'll link it all below. And honestly, I might, give some money myself because I totally second everything. Like coding has been, incredible for my life as well. So yeah. Nader, thank you again so much for coming on. And, hopefully talk soon and you have a productive day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Great. See ya.